Hello, welcome to the world of Word.
Coming up, another word in your attic.
And if you enjoy this, visit our Patreon to find out more about our exclusives and our general work of national importance.
The link is in the notes below. And now, on with the show.
Word in your attic, a Zoom with a view.
Once again, hands across the ocean, all the way to the United States for another Englishman abroad. It's a delight to welcome Tony Fletcher. Tony!
Tony, fantastic to see you. Are you still in the is it the Catskills you live in? You were out just outside somewhere near Woodstock. Is that where you are now?
I was just outside Woodstock in a place called Mount Tremper just over a year ago. I moved into Kingston, which is actually the original state capital of New York. It's got a lot more history than most places you'll find in the States. That's a downsizing move. And for many of us who reach this stage of life, it's also when you've gone through a long and mostly successful marriage and your kids are getting older and you make decisions to live separate lives. And I moved back to a town, to a small city, partly with the idea I thought I'd get into an apartment and I would be able to just close the door and travel whenever I wanted to. Did not expect to be spending 23 hours a day in that apartment.
No, that's kiboshed that. Although you're still going with your fabulous One Step Beyond podcast, all the stuff about the outside world, getting out and traveling. So that's still up and running.
Yeah, well, ironically, I actually launched the podcast in the middle of a pandemic, and God knows, it's adapting as your show is as well. You adapt to the times in hand. So yeah. I think actually it gives us, we try and look at the positive. It gives us a chance to review and reflect on how we want to approach our lives. And in terms of travel, I think for a lot of people, it's a chance to reset and rethink about ethical travel and what their footprints may have been doing, and how just our mad abuse of the planet has resulted in a series of pandemics, and they've all kind of come from the same abuse of the planet, and pretty much like taking animals out of their environment and putting them in environments where they don't belong, mingling with other animals and then humans, and we pay that price. So to the extent that people like you and me who seem to be healthy are being able to ride this out, then it does give us a chance to hopefully review how we're going to go forward. I try and be optimistic. There's an equal side of me that's completely pessimistic and cynical, but I try and maintain the cup is always half full.
So what's your routine at the moment?
My routine is, I try and get a decent amount of exercise in, and otherwise I'm at my desk a lot. I've got to be honest. At this very desk, and we're just starting to edge up into getting to reopen here. I think where I am, we're in what's called phase 2 out of 4. And if things keep going well in New York State, we'll move into phase 4 the second week of July. And one thing I'm really looking forward to, because I do miss my various communities, and whether that's going to a gig. I live right around the corner from 2 record shops and a guitar shop and a great live music venue. And of course, they were all closed for 3 months. And much as I'm looking forward to going back to gigs, and also actually within my sort of running community, just the social aspect of seeing people of the race that you don't normally see in your day-to-day life, I'm really looking forward to getting back to students I work with for the Rock Academy up here.
All right.
I'm a show director, and we were halfway, looking at the single EP behind you, Mark, we were halfway through a Beatles and Beyond rehearsals for a show that was meant to take place at the end of April. And so this is 8 to 18-year-old kids of all abilities. It's not like an academy in that sense. It's called the Rock Academy. And I'm really looking forward to getting back with those kids, because they haven't been able to go to school and they miss their music, and they're all doing what they can do on Zoom and Instagram videos. But there's no substitute for making music in a room with other people, or listening to other people making music in a room.
Have you been reviewing your possessions, as many of us has during this time, sitting there amongst a lifetime's accumulation of records and magazines and junk, and thinking, what have I got this for? Or on the other hand, I'm really glad I hang on to this. Have you got anything there you could show us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a bit of both, because the downsizing, I did do away with a lot of the records and CDs, and we can talk about that. I think, was it Andrew Collins you had on who did away with
Yeah.
records?
Oh,
Various
quite a
people
few
have.
people.
I know various people, and most of them are very mournful about it. He's putting on a brave face, actually. Maybe he actually doesn't care, but a lot of people have been a bit weepy about it. But there we are.
And David, I see has
I just do this to annoy you.
Yeah, that's wallpaper. Actually,
I've
it's not real.
found no use for it.
That's your Zoom wallpaper.
I just ring up people and annoy them.
Touch it to prove it's real.
Yes, it's real.
There we go.
Real.
It's real. All right. So now I pulled out a whole bunch of things. So I have been reviewing, and with part of, I'm always amazed at what I brought across the Atlantic. Like you see this, okay? Tom and Jerry sketch bag.
Oh, wonderful.
Right.
Open this up. No, that's not the first page, because as a kid, you never do things in the right order. First football match I ever went to.
Oh, brilliant.
Crystal Palace, Inter Milan, 12th of June, 1971. That's pretty much the last time Palace were in Europe. I
was going to say that. That's a pretty unrealistic introduction to Palace, isn't it? You're playing Inter Milan.
Well, the next one was more realistic.
Was that Selhurst Park?
Absolutely, Selhurst.
Fantastic.
On the 11th of September, I went to my first league match, Palace Manchester United, 43,720 people. We lost 3-1. And I can remember to this day that was the team. By the way, I kind of hate Manchester United, as I meant to hate every team except Palace. But that was the team of like Dennis Law and George Best and Bobby Charlton. And I remember correctly, they had 2 goals disallowed. I stood with my mother in the away end with all these Manchester United fans, and that was a treat. It goes on and on and on, and as Palace sort of drop down the divisions, so the attendances drop as well.
Tell me this, were they in those days playing Dave Clark's Glad All Over?
Yes, always.
They were. So it was.
Always.
Was that adopted quite early on? Was that adopted when it was a hit, kind of thing?
It must have been, because because I remember I used to stand for the away end, the White Horse end, the sort of more family end, and I'd stand right behind the goal. And from the youngest age, you'd lean over the I forgot what they're called now, but the the advertising hoardings, and you'd lean over it, and I'm feeling, and you'd smack the advertising hoarding and make a big noise. So that was back when I was like 8 years old. So the answer to that is a resounding yes, despite the fact that the Dave Clark 5 were from Tottenham. And
absolutely.
That's right.
Oh, I'm very, very pleased you've got that. We've had quite a few people getting out scrapbooks and things like that.
It's such a boys' thing, isn't it? Keep this.
Well, it's sort of
detail. And we've had quite a few girls too. Girls with scrapbooks, actually. With incredible details.
Yeah, absolutely. Though I kind of think that writing down football attendances and writing down kind of every gig you went to and every football match you went to and cataloguing your records. I've gotten in trouble with this before, but I mean, I can cop out and go to Nick Hornby. I mean, High Fidelity is a boys' book. But what I really wanted to say, because I mean, I think in some senses, yes, it would be great if we all did that, or if none of us did it, because it is pretty obsessive. But it does set you up well for a life of music collecting as well. I mean, if you're writing down your football,
or writing, actually, what a lot!
Yeah,
what a lot is that. I would like to be a journalist.
Things.
I start by writing down the records I buy in the chart or the football match.
Yeah, exactly. And I do have a book somewhere that I wasn't able to find in time, although I've got it. I thought this would be fun. I like the Tom and Jerry, but I did write down every gig I went to for a long time. And of course, it is great fun to look back and realize. I noticed in 1979, I saw the Human League and the Psychedelic Furs days apart, both opening for Spizz Energi in different venues. Now, out of those 3 groups, go and stop somebody on the street, and you know what order they will probably go in terms of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We know where Spizz lives, don't we, Mark?
We do, actually. We might go around and knock on his door and tell him, good news, somewhere in a distant field, someone is still burning a candle for you.
Right,
well, for your support acts, actually.
So something else I've got for you was given to me, actually, by my best friend. who I was in a band with when I was younger, and he has a real man attic, not a man cave, but a man attic where he has thousands upon thousands of singles, albums, Subutio. He collects all. He kind of goes to boot sales and eBays some of it, and tries to convince his wife otherwise he didn't spend any money on anything. But his singles, he just goes and collects the most obscure self-pressed punk DIY singles, not so much like your post-punk, but more your punk mod kind of very, almost like most of it's more like 3-chord kind of stuff. And he put together a book called Anoraky in the UK.
It's a very good title.
That is a great title. So Stuart McConey would have thought we should
Anoraky in the UK.
That's very good.
Tony Page, excellent.
Tony Page, and I hopefully helped out by writing the introduction to him. And he does a little bit of YouTubing. He'll go and just play one of these obscure singles. The Future Bodies, Terrorist, Final Alternative Records, recorded at Duffy's studio, Crystal Palace. I mean, have you heard of them?
No.
I can't say I have.
There's a guy called Mark Hodgkinson who used to write for Word and runs a small publishing press. Yeah. You know Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, Mark had a really good idea for a program he did on Radio 4, one-off documentary, where he just went and got he bought in a second-hand shop a load of old singles. And he just said, I'm going to find out where all the people are who made these singles. And
he tracked them all down.
Well, he as many as he could,
It was really good. I heard that.
Because that's the interesting thing about what you're talking about there is every one of those singles is a little story about somebody who tried to do something once. You know what I mean?
I absolutely hear you, because originally my friend Tony came to me with the idea of doing this book together, and he said, sort of, how can we do it together? I got these records, and I said, well, you review the records in your inimitable style, and maybe I go off and find out the story of the group. And I did so with a couple to just sort of see if we could shop the book. And one group had somebody who turned into a male model. It turned out that one of them was Max Graves Killed My Mother, Lily Allen's dad.
Keith Allen.
Keith Allen.
So you find here and there when you're scrolling through, you look through and you think, well, there's a connection. There's something I could find out here. It was going to be way too much work.
It's like finding missing people. I know that's what Mark found. It's very, very hard work. But when you do find them, it's oddly oddly exciting, because you're able to. Mark was able to ring up people and say, you made a record in 1977,
and you'd immediately have their attention. They'd be thrilled, because that was a big moment in their lives. And most people who are in bands, no matter what level that band was on, there was always a part of them that really thought they could have been bigger. I'm sure it was the same with your band. There's no shame in that. You probably thought the big time awaits,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, in a nice way, people who've been in a band that maybe released a single, 2 singles, there are smaller things in their lives that mean more to them than selling out Wembley would mean to Bruce Springsteen. I played the Half Moon in Herne Hill the night after U2. It's that kind of thing. Or
did you?
No, I did not. But
sorry, you never can tell. We're talking to Barry McIlheney yesterday, and he supported you too.
Yeah, I
thought we had a check.
Well, listen, I'll give you this one. My band was the last ever band to open for the Jam on their very final concert, the final.
There you go.
Fantastic.
There you go. That's not nothing.
It's not nothing. No, we actually played with them at Wembley 2 nights as well, so that was also not nothing.
So was that so that was the first time you played anywhere really big, was it?
Well, that was the biggest place I played in my old band. But the first big gig was we actually opened for the Jam when we had 6 gigs under our belts, and we were 16 years old, and opened for them at the Rainbow in the summer of 1980. And
that's fantastic.
It was a catastrophe.
You're 16.
Gosh, you must have been terrified.
I was so looking forward to it. And I have to say, our group, it was called Apocalypse, which is a name that actually came off the Jam A-bomb in Wardour Street. So it was very, But we had basically a punk, a mod, and a soul boy. And when we were in school uniform, you couldn't necessarily see the difference. But if you put us on the stage, I would have like this my Red Army jacket. The drummer would show up in a pair of Farrows with a gold chain around his neck. And our bass player and singer was developing a pretty nice mohawk with a leather jacket, to go with it. Summer of 1980, we are the mods, we are the mods, we are the mods. You step on the stage as an opening band for the Jam at a standing venue, the Rainbow, with a couple of thousand people in it. And to give my bandmate Jeff all the credit in the world, we actually came back and did it again a year later. And at one of those shows, he put down his bass between songs, walked around, picked up all the loose change that had been thrown at him during the previous song, and went, "Thank you very much, that's my bus fare home."
Bought a flat. Yeah.
Wow, that's fantastic.
That's amazing.
That's very.
Weller was very keen on you, wasn't he? I mean, because he paid for your label, didn't he? And it was and jamming your fanzine,
Yeah, I mean, to get all of that completely on track, and it enabled me to bring you another souvenir that I'm so glad. Actually, I didn't know I had necessarily held on to this one. It's a story. I mean, it's something I wrote about in my memoir, Boy About Town, which there may be a sequel that follows through more with the label. But the fanzine was absolutely 100% always my own thing, always. And I will say, Weller took me under his wing to some extent, wanted to start an independent label, ended up starting 2 labels, his own sort of Respond Records. But before that, wanted to get a label going with me. We were very unsure whether it should be jamming or not jamming. We ultimately called it jamming because jamming had a name as my fanzine. The part about that I really regret is very quickly people started to think that he was funding this fanzine that I built up literally from.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that, I've got one younger son who's very musical, and it's not like I'm aspiring to necessarily be his manager, but I think there's a lot of advice you can give younger people that, with the best of intentions, you can still do the wrong things. It's not about bad intentions. It's sometimes about not thinking things through, not having a plan.
No, sure.
But, there's some of that. But
what's the item you've got there?
On a brighter note, this is what started me really on my journey. It's in 2 pieces, which is sort of appropriate for punk and Ripped and Torn and all of that. It's the Center Pages of Sounds, September 10th, 1977.
Wow.
And it's Billy Savage's piece on fanzines. So that should say somewhere, fanzines.
Fanzines, yes, it does.
And this is I guess the thing that set me on my path in life, that he writes, at the end of his introduction, before getting a little analytical about it, as he may.
It's John Savage.
It's John. I can see John Savage's name. That's right, yeah.
And he does say somewhere here about the it was easy, it was cheap, go and do it. And I read this as we did at the time under the school desk during a math lesson, and I went, easy, cheap, do it. This sounds like fun. No real aspirations to a life as a music journalist, author, having a fanzine, having a big magazine. We were 13 years old. We'd just come back to school from the summer of punk, going into, I think, the 3rd year at school. Feeling the old 3rd year of school, feeling very, those of us who are into music, feeling excited but conflicted, because pre-summer we'd all been trying to one-up each other on who had the last Deep Purple album. And half of us came back saying, what did you do over the summer? Because I saw the Sex Pistols on Top of the Pops, and I bought records by the Jam and the Stranglers and the Boomtown Rats, and all the major label kind of new wave / punk bands. And I've been looking through those early issues of jamming that were printed at school, very, very conflicted. It took a while to shake the Queen and the Genesis and the Pink Floyd. It wasn't overnight, but I fell in love with the Jam, that summer, and kind of didn't look back. And that article, it was just a moment of excitement. I was like, well, I'm bored as hell in this math lesson. There's music going on. He says it's easy, cheap, go and do it. He's quoting Mark Perry, I guess.
Yeah.
let's give it a shot. Got it printed on the school Roneo machine. It was rubbish.
Oh, the Roneo. There's
Wonderful.
There's nothing more Proustian than the name of an old duplicating machine. Roneo, Gestetner, all those kind of things. Remember
and the smell of the ink as well.
Smell of the ink.
Oh, it's fabulous.
You know, later on, when I did it more as a fanzine, I would use cow gum at home, which I regret to say I think was actually made from cows. I believe I've been vegan for a long time, so I look back on that one weirdly. And I had the great idea of spray painting through a stencil. The first issue we did properly, Jamming number 5, it actually had the Paul Weller and Adam Ant and John Peel interview, and it was the first one I took to a proper printer. It was a stroke of genius, except that I did all the spray painting in my bedroom. So I spray painted 1,000 copies through a stencil.
So the whole of your bedroom was covered in a sort of
the delight of your parents.
That's right, yeah.
So if I wasn't getting high on cow gum, I was like burning my brain cells with spray paint.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That John Savage piece, you know, it's not like it's deep. It just made it really look like fun. It was like, here's this DIY movement.
Yeah.
And I'm a firm believer that if the referee doesn't give the pen, if the referee had given the penalty that you really thought he should have given pre-VAR or even post-VAR, that doesn't mean you would have scored the penalty. Your team would have scored the penalty. All this, like, we was robbed. Life just takes you on journeys. If this piece hadn't come out, maybe something else would have done. I'd still have started a fan team. But that's what got me going.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing you remember it. That says so much about the part that music weeklies played in your lives back in those days. You know, you remember really clearly just reading sentences in them. It's extraordinary.
You really did. And there was another kid in my class who I'm still friends with. And it's amazing. Maybe I should ask you how early you started on your paths, because we were almost set at the age of 13. He was the kid who somehow had the money to buy at least 3 of the music papers. And he was always into like all new music, just voracious. I mean, he's got he puts up playlists on Spotify called Latest Shit. Hopefully I can get away with saying that, but if not, I'm sure you'll believe it.
Don't worry.
And he's still got the hippest music taste of anybody I know. And, he's my age, which is definitely not 24. He was set in his path on life. So I'd often borrow music papers from him. It's always possible I was borrowing his copy of Sounds and just took the center pages out. But actually,
it will be.
Actually, famously, I asked him on the way out of the math lesson if he'd start a fanzine with me, and he said, no, go ask Lawrence Weaver. Lawrence Weaver was a hard rock fan whose dad was a prominent security guy with the big bouncer firm, and went to a lot of free concerts as a result. And he did it with me, which is why the early issues had this very odd passive-aggressive relationship between Rush and the Jam in the first of the band.
Good.
Yeah.
Very good. What else you got there?
What else do I have? Actually, I was going to circle back, but let me move on from that. I ended up writing books, and I don't know about you. Did you ever really bother getting your records autographed? Because I didn't.
The only times I ever get it done were for other people. I always felt it's very bad form to ask for it for yourself. So it's either for my wife or Mark's wife or a friend of mine.
Absolutely. Dave very sweetly got a Dylan album autographed by Dylan for my wife. And he signed it, Dave, with his left hand. It's almost illegible, which is incredible. It was so sweet of you to do it.
Probably go with his modern performances, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just being
but no, I never did it much at all. Anyway, did you?
What have you got?
Well, I did, but I've just realised, actually, I want to be slightly more chronological on this. I like getting the printed word autographed because it just seems to me that it makes sense. Like something's written, maybe you can get somebody's autograph there. It makes more sense to me. And this was another major moment in my life. So I'm talking about those early issues of the fanzine. This was also done on the school machine. It's my only surviving copy.
Oh, wow.
June 78. June 78, it had the best piece in there is a write-up of the big anti-Nazi League carnival, the Rock Against Racism carnival, which I went to. But I wrote this very...
Hold it up again. Is that the Hold it up again.
Hold it up, Tony. We
Tom
can't
Robinson.
All right.
Oh, that's great. Is that at? It's not the Victoria Park show. No, it's
Yes,
not
it is
the big concert.
Park, yeah.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah,
That's what a great cover.
marched all the way from Trafalgar Square to Hackney that day, and and would do it again tomorrow. To be quite honest, I feel like I was doing the same thing 2 weeks ago here in the States. Plus ça change, right? But I did this kind of pretty naff 2-page story of the Who because you're kids, you're trying to like fill a fanzine, and you're lucky if you can get to your parents let you march from Trafalgar Square to Hackney for a day of free music with the Clash and Steel Pulse and all of that. But a couple after this came out that summer, the Who had an exhibition at the ICA. It was a fans exhibition called Who's Who, and as I've written about both in Boy About Town and the Keith Moon book, I went along on the opening day with a couple of friends, figuring, well, the Who were the kind of group that would show up for a fans event. And sure enough, Pete and Keith both showed up, and I couldn't get close to Pete. And I had this amazing transformational moment where I'm on the second floor. There's a hologram of Keith Moon on the drums. And the holograms have kind of gone out of fashion, other than sort of, Star Wars, that whole Princess Leia thing was that hologram idea. It was pretty amazing. I mean, my memory of it was this sort of 3-dimensional Keith Moon, visible but invisible on a drum kit. And I'm looking, admiring it when somebody walks up next to me. And you know what I'm going to say, right? It's Keith Moon. And I turn, and he's got his own like little 13, 14-year-old kid by his side, who I've later found out was Zach Starkey, who was more like his to him. Right? So I turned to Keith and I looked back and I said something, and Keith said something back, and he was friendly. And I had the courage. I'm sure my heart was beating. I was a mad Who fan. I'd already seen them at Charlton as a 12-year-old. I was a mad Who fan. That's why I was there. And I pulled out this very copy and said, would you sign this for me? And he said, oh, absolutely, dear boy. No problem whatsoever. Oh, this is interesting. I haven't seen this, the story of the Who. And I said, well, you can have this by all means. He said, no. Do you have another copy on you? I said, no, just the one. He said, well, you want it signed. No problem. So he signed it. This is part one of what I want to tell you. So there's Keith Moon's signature.
Very good.
Brilliant.
Good.
I treasure that for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Well, he must have died literally a few weeks later, didn't he?
He died
It's 78, isn't it?
Literally 2 to 3 weeks later. And here's the thing that I have written about. He then took out a little, what seems to my memory like a Post-it note, but I assume it was just a scrap of paper. And he said, tell you what, dear boy, here's where I live. Pop around and see me sometime and bring a copy of your fanzine with you. That would be delightful. And he gave me the address in Curzon Place, or Curzon Street, whichever it is, in Park Lane, just off Park Lane, Mayfair.
Harry Nilsson's place, yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I did go round there. He wasn't home. In those days, you could walk into a posh apartment. That's the part I don't understand. I remember sliding a note and a copy under his door, but I don't remember anybody saying, what are you doing in this incredibly expensive posh
Sonny. So how old were you then?
Well, you were doing 14.
14. Yeah.
Incredible. That's incredible.
So
I'm really impressed.
I stuck the note under his door, and he may have been possibly in America at the time. That once I studied his life, he died about a week or so after I put that under his door, and it hit me so dramatically as a fan, but as somebody who'd met him, because people. I don't know if you remember, but the tabloids really just went at him, just like this nasty guy. And I recognized after writing the book on him that he did get boorish as he got older.
Yeah.
And there were things to him that were very unpleasant, but not when he was sober. And at that point, he was trying to be sober, and he was so genuinely nice to me that 20 years later, I turned around and said, I want to write a book about this guy.
And you did write a really good book about Keith Moon, called Dear Boy, which is highly recommended to anybody who hasn't already read it. Very good indeed. Yeah.
The other autograph I was going to show you was, because I get books autographed, and only rarely, it's not like an obsession. But just thinking about, you know, the fortunate aspects of our chosen careers, because we don't always, I'm still self-employed, and there are definitely paths I could have chosen that would have had more reliable sources of income. I'm sure pretty much all of your guests would say the same thing. But I used to work as the American kind of strip producer for all the Rapido shows, everything related.
All right.
And previous to Rapido, when it was just coming out of France as well. And they sent me down one day to interview James Brown before he was going off on a tour. And I went down to, I think it was Augusta, Georgia. And he had the big theater and was rehearsing for a tour. And Rapido was now on the BBC. And you know the old saying.
This is Antoine de Caunes.
Antoine de Caunes.
Yeah.
Rapido.
Okay. Right, yeah. Go on.
So, you know, there's always the thing with James Brown, that's Mr. Brown to you. You've heard that.
Quite.
Yeah.
All day long, because we were the BBC, he was saying to his band, that's Mr. Fletcher. Make sure you call him Mr. Fletcher.
Very good.
Does that. And I just, you know, it's just a small thing. But it's here. And, you know, he's written, my thanks always. I feel good. Put a little love in your heart, and his signature is in the middle of it.
Very good.
Fantastic.
He did it properly.
And I guess if I was to look back and sometimes say, well, you know, was that the, you know, you took this path in life, and what are some of the good, you know, what is some of your good memories? Well, getting paid to spend a day with James Brown is not a bad way to earn a living, right? You know?
Absolutely not. No, yeah. Fair enough. And we're here to give you a place to actually share that with a wider audience. You see, this is what we're here for. We're a social service, you know, to allow you during this difficult time to say, funnily enough, here's my autograph of James Brown. Then fair enough.
People come away having been richly entertained, but also left with powerful sense of envy.
What are you working on now, Tony? Anything in particular? I'm sure you're working on something.
So this is coming out in August. This is
it's Eddie Floyd. Oh, okay.
Very good.
And I wasn't necessarily looking to get a plug in on that, but Eddie was kind enough to, when he went along with the idea of doing the book, he said, well, you know, rather than you come down and stay in a hotel and just interview me 2 hours a day, come stay with me. So I stayed with him down a little outside Montgomery, Alabama, and he gave me a copy of this, which is maybe the very debut or the second ever single by the Falcons.
Oh, now the Falcons is Wilson Pickett's group, isn't that right?
Later.
Oh, okay.
At the time that this came out, this is either 1956 or 57. I don't know if you can kind of cotton on, but it's a 10-inch.
Right.
Back in the days, you know, we tend to think all pop music is 7-inch. But in the late 50s, this is one of his uncle's many independent labels. Robert West, I think, was his uncle's name, who was the manager as well of the Falcons. And this is a 10-inch, and obviously it would be worth quite a bit of money. So the Falcons and orchestra, I think the orchestra might just be pushing it a little bit. At Detroit 35, Michigan. The A-side, by the way, is called Sent Up. It was written by Lance Finney and somebody Payton, and it's lyrically very inappropriate. It's about getting sent to jail for going with some jailbait. Can this be Christmas on the other side is probably much more appropriate family listening.
You can answer me a question about Eddie Floyd. One of my favorite Eddie Floyd records is Big Bird.
Yes.
Is it the case that he wrote that on the tarmac at Heathrow Airport while waiting to go back for Otis Redding's funeral? Is that right?
Correct.
It's a wonderful record, it's a brilliant record, and the lyrics are all about "Take me up, Big Bird." It's all about a huge plane trying to get into the air. And I heard that story years ago, that it was written on the tarmac at Heathrow. It's probably too good to be true.
No, it's not too good to be true. He was on his own tour back in the UK when Otis's plane went down. And I think the rest of the tour was a bit of a blur for him, but I think he was encouraged to finish the dates he had and get back for the funeral. His plane, now, you know, even for starters, you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm getting on a plane and one of my best friends has just died in a plane crash. His plane actually went to take off and then stopped, circled back around, came back. There was some kind of engine failure. They didn't put them on another plane, which was his expectation. Like it's about 5 hours later, 6 hours later, I think hopefully it's in the book. They were like, all right, all back on the same plane.
On the same plane.
On the same plane.
On the way to somebody's funeral. This is very unsettling.
And so as the plane was taxiing, you know, and getting ready, he is going, get on up, Big Bird, get on up.
It's a brilliant record.
He heard this song. Booker T. Jones should take a lot of the credit for that. That's Booker playing guitar.
Right, really?
Yeah. Yeah, Booker was obviously, when you got Steve Cropper in your band, you don't...
Yeah, you don't necessarily...
No. That's a brilliant story. Fantastic.
Tragically, the delay in the flight meant that he missed the funeral. He was missed the funeral. And having seen photographs, he's almost conspicuous by his absence. Everybody was at that funeral.
So that's coming out in August.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And go on.
Well, you mentioned this earlier, and I'm happy to talk more about certainly about music writing, but you will recall, both of you, that when I came and did the Word in Your Ear event,
Wilson Pickett book, yeah.
I seem to remember at the beginning you were like, oh yes, and Tony's just come back from spending a year traveling around the world and backpacking with his family, and we'll get to talk about that.
Oh right, yes, cool.
Too much, and we never did. But I want to show you my favorite picture from that entire trip, because it just fills me with so much like hope and sort of joy. And I am a terrible photographer, and I had an iPhone 5 that was not a good camera. I've now got a better phone camera. I can see the difference. Most of my photos weren't very good. I was in India at a place called Dodabata, which is the highest point in southern India. I don't know if you've ever heard of a British hill town called Ooty in southern India. It's, the British would retreat to the hills in the summer.
In summer, yeah.
And they did build one of those, like what looked like a model train. Like the train is about 4 feet wide, and it winds its way down the hills. And Ooty is right up top there. There's one of 2 train lines like that in India. The other one's in Darjeeling, and I rode them both. I took a bus from where we were staying, just a public bus, and decided to just jog up this last part of the hill. It was only about 1.5 miles, 2 miles. Pretty much all the Indians drive everywhere. The middle class sort of take taxis when they're holiday makers and driving, but some people were walking. I have a feeling it was a Saturday, and I was hands down absolutely the only white person within sight. And
certainly the only white person jogging 1.5 miles up a mountain.
Yeah. It's a great way to draw attention to yourself.
That's Mad Dogs in English, but that is.
I actually love doing it, which is why I want to tell you this story. And there were people that were walking up the hill, God bless them. And I also need to say, it's one of these hills where at the top, it's like there's a market there. It's not like the Catskill Mountains where you get to the top, there's no view. You're like, oh, I'm at the top of the hill now. I go down again. This is like, there are market stalls, there are viewpoints, so when I actually got up top, there were about 1,000 people there. It was a big area, and why not? It's a nice place to hang out. So I passed this group of Indian kids, and no sooner did I pass them than I heard the pitter-patter of footsteps. And I turned, not remotely defensively, because there was nothing in my mind, but I'm like, are they running with me?
Why are they following me?
Around, and they actually said, we want to run with you. Tell us how to run. Which just sounds like ridiculous, but it plays into the fact that actually that a lot of people in the Indian middle class are doing a lot of public transportation. And I was like, well, sort of one foot after the other. And I just said, I've got to take a picture of you guys. And I've subsequently had it blown up. And
oh, it's lovely. That's a beautiful picture.
Teaching people how to run.
That to me that's the memory I have of India. It's of young people smiling.
Yeah.
There are many Indians, just like there are many Americans, and at least 2 Britons. But that is my takeaway of India. Maybe the only decent picture that I took, but I love there's the saris, but there's jeans. Somebody's got trainers, but most of them are in sandals. They're carrying
brilliant.
Water, and they just look like, can we join you? Can we run to the top?
It's a fabulous picture.
Tony, that's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. That's a lovely,
stories.
positive note on which to finish, and we'll let you get on with the rest of your day.
I really appreciate your time on doing this.
That's all right.
Seems like you're having a lot of fun with it as well.
We're fine. It keeps us off the streets.
Yeah.
Because, boy, I'm bored with the neighbourhood.
Keeps the big old red beach ball of happiness off the sand.
Absolutely.
For a bit longer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great to see you, Tony.
Tony.
We'll see you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right,
see you
thank
back
you.
in the UK, I hope.